Alice stares out of the window while Rebecca helps her pack for her new venture. She has to complete her screenplay since its deadline comes near. Rebecca is doing her best to look out for her friend. Alice casually walks towards a drawer and pulls out a revolver. At the sight of the firearm, Rebecca becomes worried since her friend is moving away while in possession of an illegal firearm. Alice thinks it is essential for her to have a weapon in case her ex-boyfriend, Ben, comes and attacks her a second time. While Alice is nonchalant about the situation, her moving to an isolated place worries Rebecca. She begs Alice to stay close. However, Alice has already decided that she does not want to remain in her apartment, where Ben can find her. Alice messes around with her camera while Rebecca drives to her secret workplace. The two casually flirt as the journey continues, but Rebecca is more interested in how Alice afford a remote mansion in the middle of nowhere, even without money. We find out that a producer allowed Alice to use the place when she had writer's block. It seems like she's taking advantage of said producer. The two approach the mansion and slowly see the residence's sheer size. Walking in, they are amazed by the decor. They walk together like a married couple, looking around the new home. The two lie down in the bed and begin talking about the distance this new residence will place between them. Realizing this is Ben's fault, Rebecca tries to console Alice, but she comes across as pitying her, so Alice decides to dismiss the conversation and check out the rest of the house. At this point, it's obvious that Rebecca regards Alice as somewhat closer than a friend. While Rebecca is alone in the room, the creaking of a cupboard door makes her feel uncomfortable. She then leaves the room and looks for Alice as an eerie feeling follows her. Rebecca finds Alice in a room with an infant's cot inside, a sight that brings back horrible memories. Alice tortures herself by reminiscing her unfortunate past regarding children, so Rebecca steers her away. Rebecca does not want Alice to be held up in the mansion, so she offers to leave the car behind. However, Alice insists that the car's presence will serve no purpose. Rebecca agrees to take the car, but she is still concerned for her friend's well-being. Later, Alice escorts Rebecca off outside. At this point, it's safe to say Rebecca is the more responsible one of the two, showing concern for how Alice spends her time in looking after her. Eventually, Alice is left alone in the mansion with no one to accompany her, except the camera in her hands. Alice walks around the mansion and tries to take in her surroundings, to better grasp the environment around her. She eventually ends up in her room to unpack, and finds a heartfelt letter from Rebecca on top of a suitcase. The house is silent. Only the sounds of dripping water and creaking doors are all Alice hears, as she unpacks her hygiene items and places them in the kitchen vanity. She also takes her prescription antidepressants to alleviate the symptoms caused by her past trauma. Alice then leaves the bathroom, turning off the lights. Suddenly, in pitch darkness, a spirit of sorts reveals itself in front of the vanity. During the night, Alice keeps working on her screenplay. A phone call interrupts her during her writing session, only for no one to answer on the other end. With the silence not subsiding, Alice ends the call, but hears a faint screaming. Alice prepares to fall asleep as her nightly routine comes to an end. However, she is forced to get up when she hears the distant sound of a door shutting and the struggling groans of a woman. She gets up and leaves her room to investigate the source of the noise. While it may be a burglar or some random invader, Alice is expecting her ex-boyfriend, which makes her more anxious. She walks around the house and eventually finds a chair. She then stares at it until it falls over on its own. It turns out that Alice is dreaming. She wakes up nervously sweating and struggling to catch her breath. She then leaves her bed and puts on a bathrobe, clearly still shaken from her nightmare. She becomes more aware of her surroundings until she eventually gets in her bathtub to calm herself. She is relaxing under the water, but her rest ends when she starts hearing a woman's voice again. The door of the bathroom then swings open. Alice is shaken, but calms down as she convinces herself that nothing is wrong. Alice hops on a call with Rebecca, who informs her that Ben has left prison and went to her apartment in search of her. This makes Alice even more uncomfortable, as she now feels unsafe despite being secluded far enough that no one should be able to find her. She cuts the call as her anxiety gets the better of her, and she falls asleep. She wakes up at night, hearing someone shuffle past the door of her room. She walks to her table and then walks around the house. She then goes up the stairs and finds footprints leading into a room. Finally, she goes up the stairs inside until she ends up in a dark attic. Alice starts looking around, suspecting that something strange is happening, and someone is luring her to this place. She finds a suitcase placed on top of a table. Inside, she finds what she suspects to be a woman's belongings. Alice goes through all the different items inside, but her attention is caught by a tipped-over box with videotapes inside. The videotapes are scattered all over the floor, so she checks them out. They are all labeled, supposedly owned by some woman called Lucy, who might also be the owner of the items in the suitcase. Alice goes outside, takes out her camera, places the videotape inside, and transfers the feed to her laptop to see the recorded footages. One of the tapes show Lucy and David Woods, a newly married couple, preparing for a visit from David's mom. Alice finds out that the house belongs to David's mother. At night, Alice looks over a recording of her and Rebecca. In the recording, it's clear that there is sexual tension between them. Alice has never been open about her relationship with Rebecca, because it may make Ben angry at her. Another night in the mansion goes by, and more sounds of a woman crying can be heard coming from across the house. This time, Alice hears the sounds from the bathtub while the faucet is running. Alice tries to keep calm and closes the tap, but she can't help but leave the room scared. Upon leaving the bathroom, she notices her laptop screen covered in strange writing. She walks over and notices a message resembling a plea for help, spanning the screen. Alice tries to remove the message, but she decides to look around the house first to find out what is happening. She looks around her room again, until suddenly, she's startled by what she thinks is some supernatural creature in the same room. She quickly leaves and calls Rebecca. Breathless, she starts talking to her friend while tearing up. Rebecca is slightly annoyed, but listens to Alice as she explains that someone else is inside her house. Alice backs up against a wall, explaining to Rebecca that the house is haunted. Rebecca hears her out, but thinks watching too many movies made her delusional. As Alice explains, Rebecca keeps accusing her that she might not be in the right state of mind. Alice gives up on convincing Rebecca, so she ends the call. Later, Alice takes her medicine and then gets back to work. Sudden motivation strikes her, believing that the story of the house and the tapes might be the perfect inspiration for her screenplay. She begins going through the recorded videotapes again. The footage starts with David filming his wife in admiration. When Lucy sees the camera, he flirts with her. Being filmed is making her shy, so David stops the recording. Lucy is planning to meet Marie, one of her closest friends whom she has not seen in a really long time. David starts feeling uncomfortable about the idea of Lucy meeting her friend alone. He does not trust her. He suspects his pregnant wife might be cheating on him with her friend. Lucy feels offended by this, but David explains that he is insecure about the possibility of her choosing someone else over him. Lucy seems to understand his side, so she walks over and reassures him that he's the only one for her. The tape makes Alice slightly uncomfortable as she sees herself in Lucy. However, the videotapes also brought the added benefit of inspiration. Alice can now finish a significant portion of her screenplay. That night, Alice struggles to sleep inside the house that has already scared her so many times. With all the strange occurrences in the house, even the creaking of doors makes her uncomfortable and keeps her awake. Fast forward to another recording of the Woods couple. David finds his wife painting a chair in their new child's room. Lucy had been working in the room alone, so she's expecting that David might help her, but he just keeps recording while she works. While watching the recording, Alice finds some comfort observing the loving couple. David places the camera down as he walks over to his wife, and things start heating up. David is interested in getting her in the mood, but Lucy grows increasingly annoyed by him bothering her, so she leaves the room. After watching the recording, Alice checks out the room Lucy had worked on. She sees the chair that Lucy painted, and then moves over to the cot made for her future child. Alice feels some strange connection to Lucy as she sits down on the rocking chair. In a soft voice, she asks Lucy what happened to her. Suddenly, a recording starts playing on Alice's laptop. Lucy is talking to someone on her phone, while David creeps up on her with his camera. Seeing her husband recording her, she cuts the call. David wants to know the person on the other end. Lucy is fed up with David's jealousy and is unwilling to give a clear answer. This causes him to get physical, feeling that he might be a danger to her. Lucy discloses that the person she was talking to is David's mother. She leaves her husband behind in the room, feeling unsafe with him around. Even with the knowledge that Lucy was talking to her mother-in-law, David still does not believe her. He decides to redial the last number, only to find that Lucy was being truthful and his mother really was the last person she was talking. He is still not satisfied as his suspicions remain. Alice watches the footage in slight horror as it brings back bad memory. However, the tapes are too engrossing for her to stop, so she continues watching even when the videos are giving her bad flashbacks. The next tape starts with David recording his wife while she sleeps. He zooms in on her face during her slumber, and eventually waking her up with a compliment. She wakes up, but looks at her husband in horror. Alice suddenly gets a call, which she picks up immediately. She's on edge as the caller does not make their identity known, and she only hears a woman crying from the other end. She cuts the call short, and then gets up from her seat, only to hear nothing but Lucy's voice in the distance. The following recording shows Lucy playing a solo piano as David records her. He is intensely focused on her, while she is more concerned with her musical performance. Meanwhile, Alice hears the same music somewhere in the house as well. She follows the sound of the instrument to the room with the piano. She sees a woman seated at the piano. However, the person before her does not respond when she enters the room, and the music continues. The performance then abruptly stops, and the woman sits silently near the piano. Suddenly, the ghost disappears and reappears in front of Alice, revealing Lucy's face as that of an evil spirit. She issues a grim warning and disappears afterward. Alice wakes up, realizing the encounter with the ghost was actually part of a dream. While the sight of the ghost may have been frightening, the dream itself is not, since Alice is not afraid of Lucy. Her curiosity continues to push her to watch the tapes, one video after another. In the next footage, Lucy is packing some of her belongings and tries to leave the house, discreetly. With David acting so obsessed, she is scared of her husband. David finds her at the door and confronts her, asking what's wrong. Lucy tries to justify herself, but David does not care. He demands that his wife return to him. He is insistent, but Lucy feels unsafe, so she doesn't surrender to her husband. Eventually, David has had enough. He forcefully tries to take Lucy's car keys away. Amid his struggle, David concludes that Lucy is cheating on him with another man. Realizing that David is losing his mind, Lucy looks at him in disbelief. His insecurities and jealousy have affected his mental health. It's clear to her that he needs psychological help. When David closes in on Lucy, the tape cuts out. Alice wants to know what happens next, so she shuffles through the tapes but finds the next tape missing. She thinks that it must have gotten lost somewhere. She grabs the suitcase and takes it to her room. She also puts on Lucy's clothes and accessories. She's starting to look more and more like her. Eventually, Alice sees Lucy in her reflection. With an understanding of how to evoke Lucy's spirit from beyond the grave, she starts talking to Lucy in the mirror, trying to find answers to the tape's unanswered question. Alice asks Lucy to show what happened, and this request stirs up some furniture in the house. It seems supernatural forces are now inside the mansion. Alice starts doing some chores around the house and talking to Rebecca at the same time. Rebecca starts talking about Alice and Ben's past relationship. Like Lucy, Alice had fallen victim to Ben's jealousy and insecurity. She was also pregnant and had suffered a miscarriage when Ben was physically. Eventually, Alice becomes obsessed with the tapes. She keeps psychotically muttering how she needs the tapes. After this started happening, Rebecca is once again concerned for her demented friend. Alice insists that she might find the missing tapes somewhere online. Rebecca is confused, but eventually gives in and promises to search for it online during her free time. Alice waits in anticipation until her friend finally calls her. Rebecca starts describing an incident related to the Woods couple from 2006. The couple was reported missing by David's mother, but the evidence shows that David might have taken his along with Lucy's. Suddenly, the lights behind Alice start to move independently, so Alice ends the call and walks out to investigate. Nothing seems unusual, but Alice is still careful and on edge. Eventually, she reaches for one of the ceiling beams. She hangs onto it while the door closes on its own. Alice is startled for a second, but then she sees a camera containing the final tape she's looking for. With the tape now in her possession, she immediately goes to her laptop to see what happened to Lucy and David. In the recording, David has restrained his wife. He forces her to admit that she is cheating on him. She denies being unfaithful, but David brings up Luke, having found out he was out of town when Lucy was supposed to meet with Marie. David's revelation eventually forces her to break down, and finally, Lucy begins to admit her sins. Lucy admits to seducing Luke, finally giving David reason to believe that his wife had been dishonest the entire time, and the child in her belly is possibly not even his. Upon hearing her confession, David does not respond immediately, leaving Lucy alone as he fills the bathtub. David no longer seems concerned. He has lost his composure. He then frees his wife from the constraints, only to force her down into the tub. He records as he forces her under the water, trying to drown her. Lucy struggles, trying hard to break free, but David's grip on her neck is too strong. She stops struggling and loses her life in the bathtub. Alice watches in horror. The gruesome truth is not enough to cure her attachment to Lucy's story. David then pulls Lucy's body out of the bathtub, where he takes one last moment with her in his arms. He then carries the body outside, placing it in the courtyard before dragging it along to the forest surrounding the mansion. He stops after finding a suitable burial ground for his late wife. Alice keeps watching the tragedy unfold before her, not looking away despite the sheer horror of the situation. Finally, once the hole has been dug, David says goodbye to his lifeless wife. He places her body in the grave and records her in his camera one last time, before covering her up for good. With the deed done, David returns to where he prepared a noose. His completely shattered life left him with nothing to live for, so he ends with his own hands. Alice goes outside to look for Lucy. She finds the shovel and other tools David uses to bury his wife. She follows the videos to find where Lucy was buried. She eventually finds the spot, but the moment is interrupted by a phone call from Ben. He is calling to apologize and desperately wants to be forgiven. Alice listens, but then notices someone inside the mansion. She suspects it's Ben inside, but Ben denies her accusation. Eventually, he starts crying, but he finally accepts the situation and ends the call. This means there is some other intruder in the mansion. Despite the threat of an invader, Alice goes inside to finish watching the recording. Inside, she finds out that David never succumbed to the noose, having survived with his mother coming to the rescue. After discovering this truth, David appears behind her, confusing her for Lucy. Alice darts out of the chair and rushes for her suitcase. David does not react immediately. Instead, he keeps calling out his late wife's name. Alice finds her suitcase, but cannot find the one thing she packed for this situation. She calls Rebecca, asking her where her revolver is. Rebecca finally reveals that the gun was never packed, because she doesn't want Alice to be left alone with a gun. Unfortunately, this means Alice no longer has her only method of self-defense. As the call continues, David shows up, grabbing Alice by the neck. Still believing it to be Lucy, he drags Alice to the bathroom and starts reenacting the tragedy from the past. This time, however, a visitor is present to help Alice. She struggles in the bathtub as David tries to drown her, but his efforts are cut short as the spirit of Lucy shows up to confront her foolish husband. David is startled by the sight of the ghost, immediately rushing for the door. He turns around again, only for Lucy to reappear in front of him and startle him again. He stumbles, falling over the ledge of the staircase. David lies lifeless on the ground as the fall from the ledge is enough to end him. Lucy looks at her pitiful husband as she completes exacting her revenge. She walks up the stairs and back to the bathroom to clear the bathtub. She unplugs the drain and stops the tap, finally allowing Alice to come out of the water. The next day, Rebecca comes to check on her friend. Given last night's incident, she's worried about Alice's well-being. All the lights are closed, and the entire mansion is in disarray. She walks around the room until she finds Alice's medicine container, alongside a screenplay printout. Rebecca is angry that Alice did not take her medicine, but she keeps looking for her. Rebecca enters the bathroom as she notices her friend in the tub. Considering Alice's past traumatic experience inside a bathtub, Rebecca becomes worried, so she immediately reaches in for her and pulls her out. As she tries to carry Alice over to the bed, Alice struggles and cries. She does not want to sleep because she fears the horrors awaiting her in her dream. Rebecca eventually gets her to lie on the bed. Alice is still in shock. She can barely breathe properly. So Rebecca gives Alice some medicine and listens to her explaining what she has discovered about Lucy and David. Alice reveals that David never passed away, so his mother declared her son and daughter-in-law missing to protect him. Alice then reveals that David has been watching her spend her days around the house, blaming him for all the strange occurrences. Since Alice is in horrible condition, Rebecca decides to let her friend get some sleep. Rebecca grabs the printout of the screenplay placed on the side table to see what Alice has been working on in the past few days. The screenplay reveals the events that Alice has been describing since the beginning. Rebecca tries to follow the story, eventually realizing that writing the screenplay must have been a task of great torment for Alice. She then walks over to her, apologizing for leaving the demented woman alone inside the mansion, given its history. Rebecca decides to look around the mansion to see what has happened in the past few days. She finds a camera where David was supposed to have fallen. She picks up the device and plays the recording, only to see a footage of herself. This scares her, as the recording is creepy and shows that Alice has an obsession resembling Ben's. The recording shows Rebecca, deep in her sleep, and Alice zooming in on her. Having read Alice's screenplay, Rebecca is put off by this, but the icing on the cake is when the recording ends, with Alice complimenting Rebecca in the exact same way as David complimented Lucy in her sleep.